Hey guys, and welcome back to Tuts Plus. So in the next half an hour or so, we're going to go through how to bring in our Maya object that we prepared in the previous part into Keyshot, and how to apply materials, change the environment and the lighting, and apply shaders, and then finally create a render that we like. So the first thing that I want to get your attention to is that Keyshot uses quite a lot of CPU power. So what you might want to do if it's a bit too laggy is that you want to come into your task manager and then right click on Keyshot on the processes, then go to set affinity. And once you're here, you can go ahead and control how many of your CPU cores it's going to use. Now obviously the more you have, as it's a purely CPU based renderer, the faster your renders are going to be. And if you only have one or two, then it might not be advisable to use Keyshot in that case. So what I'm going to do is I'll actually just turn off 2 for the sake of recording, so hopefully everything will go smoothly. But you can experiment and see how your computer can handle Keyshot. So once you've done that, just click OK. And you'll notice that mainly it will only work on the cores that you set it to, and it will leave to free, so hopefully it won't be as laggy. Okay, so once we've done that and you open up Keyshot, here it is, you can go to File and then go to Import and find the object that you want to import in, and we save this one as a Maya binary, and Keyshot can handle Maya binary really well, and OBJs as well, and quite a lot of different types, as you can see here. So I'll just import my MB file in, and then once you've done that, it will ask you loads of different settings that you can mess around with. So you can set center geometry, snap to grid, keep original, and then the size as well, the up orientation. I normally just leave this as it is, and then you can also change the tessellation quality here, and I'll just have that as 1 in this case. And then once you set these up, you can just hit import. And in this case, because the case is actually quite heavy, it's around 200 megabytes, it might take a while to import all the parts in, but once it is in, it can handle the scene fairly easily, and you can mess around with it quite fast. So just give it a second to import, and then we can have a look at the different tools that we have underneath here that we can play around with. Okay, so it should be nearly there. So on the bottom you can see that you have your import as well, so that you have above here library and your project. And now that it's finally loaded, we can have a look at our model. So as you can see, I can rotate around freely, I can zoom with Alt right click, so pretty similar to Maya. Okay, and as you can see, when I rotate, it gets a bit fuzzy, and the reason for that is that Keyshot is a real-time renderer. So the more I let it go here, so let's just see, I want to get some more details here. When I let go and I don't rotate, as you can see, as time goes, it will start rendering more and more details. Now you can go ahead and set this into different settings as well. If you go to your preferences, okay, you can go to pause the real-time renderer after 15 seconds, which will obviously release some stress from your CPU, or you can just set it to be never, and if you do that, it will just keep rendering and rendering until it renders the final mesh. And as you can see, as soon as I rotate around, it will get fuzzy again, and then when I let it go, it will render more details. And this allows you to make changes on the fly really quickly. Okay, so once you get a hang of the navigation and you can move around your model and so on, let's just cover some of the basic of the lighting. So Keyshot uses HDR lighting maps, and this one is the default one that's in here at the moment. And we can quickly adjust the lighting intensity. That's a very useful shortcut with the up and down keys. Okay, so I can make it darker, and I can make it lighter with the up and down keys, and there's no need to press the render button, press it again and keep re-rendering just to see if our lighting is correct, or the lighting intensity. Now you'll notice that when we rotate around, it will go ahead and have a center point on your model somewhere where it's going to zoom into. So if I wanted to zoom down here, it might be a bit difficult for me. So what I need to do is I need to set the center point of the camera where it's looking at the moment. And we can do that fairly easily if we go into our project window. And then let me just drag this onto my other screen here and make it a bit smaller. So let's just go through the project window quickly before we dive into anything. This will be a sort of beginner's introduction into Keyshot as well as the rendering. So by the end of this, you should be able to render anything that you want with Keyshot. Okay, so as you can see in our project window, we got our scene, and in there we got our Maya project. Now if you click this little icon here, you'll see all the different parts that are inside the case. And if you remember in the previous part, I said that there are different ways of applying materials. So this would be one way of doing it. If you group all these parts together, then I can select that group, and I would have to unlink and then link the parts together again and apply a shader to it. But we've done it a different way, and I'll show you that in just a second. So inside the model, you can actually duplicate and move and rotate your model around the scene just like you do in Maya, if you need to. Now if you go into your materials tab, you'll notice that these are the basic Lambert materials that we set up previously inside Maya, and for now we'll just ignore this tab and we'll come back to it later. Now if you come into your environment tab, you'll notice that this is the default HDR that we are currently using, and we can also change the contrast, the brightness that we did with the up and down keys previously. We can change the size. So you'll notice here that that's the HDR that we're actually using for our case. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that where it is. Now a very useful tool inside Keyshot is that you can change the rotation of the HDR. So if you don't like the lighting where the main light is coming from the HDR, you can just rotate it around, and as you can see, the lighting will change accordingly. And this is a very useful tool that I use quite a lot. Now a different thing that you can do is, once let's say you get the lighting correctly but you don't want to use this background, you can also use a color or backplate image. So if you go on color, you can pick color that you want to use. Let me just make this smaller as well. Okay, and then hit OK, and there's our background color that Keyshot is now going to use. Now underneath here you can also use ground shadows, so you can turn it on or off, and you can also use ground reflections, which is a very nice tool. Okay, now I'm not going to go into these, but you can see that you can set the shadow, color, flatten ground, ground grid, in case you want to see the grid, and the ground size as well. So that's about it for the environment settings. And if you go into camera, where we first wanted to come, you can see that we can select a look at point. Okay, so if I click that and I click somewhere on my model, you'll see that it will center my look at point there, and when I zoom in, it will zoom in onto that. Okay, so let me just move that back into the center and zoom out. So I like it somewhere there, so I'll leave that where it is. Now also in the camera settings, you can create new cameras. You can set positions, so you can set the distance that we do with Alt-Right, and then we can set the orbit as well. So if you wanted to go with something specific, then you can do that as well. So I'll just have that minus 60. Okay, and elevation I'll have that as 15, and then I will just use my look at point again to move my case into the center of the image. You can also set perspective or orthographic mode, and in perspective you can also set focal length and so on. Field of view, and we can also turn on depth of field and then set the point of focus and so on. Okay, and the settings I'm not going to go into for now. We can also set performance or quality, so this is actually the preview image and not the final render that we do. We can set the size and so on. Okay, so now that we covered roughly the basics, we'll go through how to apply the shaders in a different environment as well. So the first thing that I like to do is actually change to a better environment. So if I go to my Keyshot library and drag it onto this screen, you'll see that in here we got loads of different stuff. We got different materials. So as you can see, these are all the Keyshot default materials, and I'm sure you can get more, but for what I use Keyshot normally, all these default materials are perfect. You can change colors obviously, or for the different shaders, and here you have your environments library. Now you can import many different HDRs that you have, and as you can see I have quite a few, and also there are default Keyshot environments, and this being one of them. So let me just set this one. Now if I go back to my project window and to my environment and turn back my lighting environment so you can see our environment, as you can see now that we got a decent environment, I can rotate my case around this environment just to get a feel for the lighting. So let's say I like it somewhere around here, so I just leave in that rotation, turn back on my color, and then let's just close this one back down. Whoops. And let me set my lookup point back where it was, maybe a little bit higher, and click done. And then when I'm here I can adjust the lighting just fine, maybe somewhere there with the up and down keys. So as you can see, there are loads of different, I think these are default HDRs that you can play around with, and then there are also all these studio lighting setups that you can play around with and see which one you like the best. Now one thing that I didn't mention is that actually there is a HDR editor inside Keyshot. So if you go back to our project and then into our environment, we can go into the edit tab, and you will notice that this window will pop up here, and what you can do, you can add extra sort of lights in here. And if I just move this out of the way and only show you the preview, if I move these little spots around, you'll see how it changes the lighting on the case. Okay, so you can see here where I'm moving that spotlight. Okay, so you can play around with this as well if you wanted to create some extra lights in your scene. So let me just delete that, and we'll come back to this later on. Let me just close this as well and come back to our library. So we can also set the backplates that I mentioned earlier that we can use as a background, and there are also all these textures that we can use on our shaders, okay, as normal maps. So let's go back to our shaders and start applying the shaders that we would like to use for our case. Now because we set up our scene in Maya with all these different shaders, we can actually just drag and drop the shaders onto the parts that we would like to change. So let's just see and go on search and just put in carbon fiber. Okay, and as you can see there's the basic shader there, and let's just click and drag and drop it onto our case. Now you'll notice that it will apply this material, okay, for all the parts that we had the white shader applied to by default. Okay, so this way it's very easy to quickly drag and drop all the materials that we want onto our case and see how they all look. So I can have a quick preview. Let me just move this one out of the way and change my lookup point up here so I can have a look on the up side of the case as well. Okay, so you can get a really nice, and if you let it go again, we can get a feel of how this shader will work on our case. Now we don't really want a carbon fiber shader on the case, we would want sort of a white metallic paint sort of effect. So if I type in let's say paint into my search box, you'll notice that all these paint shaders will pop up. Okay, Now let's see how this paint gloss white will look on our case if I just drag and drop that on. Okay, so let's just adjust the lighting again, make it a little bit less shiny. Okay, and I think maybe it's a bit more shiny than this, or let's just try a different shader. Okay, so I'm going to move around to here again. I quite like this shader on all the white, but let's just see if we can find something nicer. As you can see, the main benefit of Keyshot is that there are all these materials that we can pick from, and because it's a real-time renderer, we can make changes on the fly and see how our shaders look on the fly as well. So this one is sort of a metallic white. Okay, that's not exactly what we were looking for. And there's also this metallic white. Now I can use one of these ones as well, and then I can change the color to a different color by dragging and dropping it onto the shader. But instead I'll just drag the actual color that I need. So now what I'm going to do is I'll actually go to, let's say, plastic, and let's see what one of the plastic shiny shaders would look like. So let me just find, I'll put in plastic shiny onto my search box, and as you can see it will pop up all the plastic shiny shaders that Keyshot currently has. So let me just see if you can find one. Okay, hard shiny plastic, that looks pretty good. Let's see how that looks. So I'm just going to drag and drop that on, and that looks pretty much like what we need. I think maybe it needs to be a bit more shiny, but as we can see where the lighting hits, it looks pretty good. So let me just set my lookout point, and we can also drag around with the middle mouse button and holding down the Alt key. Okay, so I think I'm quite satisfied with this shade. As you can see, you get some nice reflections here, but not too many. So I think our white shader is pretty much, I call that finished. And maybe let's just see if we rotate around our environment, what sort of effect we get. Maybe we get some nicer highlights here, or we might have to modify the environment. So as you can see, as I'm rotating around, and it's on a different window. Okay, so I just have this up and I'm rotating this around. Just move it to a different screen so I don't block up as much space. So as you can see, where we have the extra lights on the top, we get some pretty nice reflections, and that's the sort of thing that I'm looking for. Okay, so in this angle, I think this lighting looks pretty good. So I'm going to leave it there. Okay, so let's pick a few different shaders. So let's go ahead and apply our black sort of matte metallic for our grill. So I'm going to put in black. Let's gloss jet black shader. So I'm just going to drag that on. Okay, and again I can have a look and see how that looks. I think that might be a bit too shiny for the mesh. It's actually fairly matte and not so shiny. So let's go ahead and put in black matte. Okay, so here's a jet matte black. And I'm going to leave it a couple of seconds to render, and that looks exactly like what we need. So that looks great. I think I'm going to go ahead and use this exact same shader on these sections as well. I think pretty much we applied all the shaders that we need. We applied it to the foot as well because that was in the same group as this one. And let's just have a look on the back as well. Okay, so on the back we need to apply a rubber material here, so I'm just going to apply rubber. And there it is. Okay, and I actually would want this to be more shiny. Now the thing that we have here is that it's actually in the same category as our metallic on the top. So let's just go back to paint jet black or metallic. Let's see how the metallic looks. Okay. and just leave it a couple of seconds to render out so you can see how it looks. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Maybe let's try this one. No, that's gonna be too dark. Let's try that one. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now you notice here that I've forgotten to apply a shader to this part. So what I can do is I should be able to select that part, or if I can't, I'm gonna have to find it in my scene. So if I go to my scene and then go to, let's try to find this case back. Okay, and there it is, it's already selected. It should be this Lambert here that, as you can notice, only has a Lambert 1 applied to it. So what I can do here is I can unlink this single piece and then apply our paint jet black to the single piece. Okay, so it's not a big deal if we leave one piece out. So let me just close these windows and let's see how Case is looking currently. And let's just move the camera up. Okay, so that looks quite good already, and as you can see, we've only been messing around for about 20 minutes and I've been explaining things in detail, so you can imagine once you get the hang of this how fast Keyshot is at rendering this. So let's just go ahead and render one out just to do a test render, and I'm gonna go ahead and set this to be fairly small so it doesn't take forever, and let's hit render. I'm gonna not modify my HDR that I used, and let's just see how this render looks as a final version with some very small tweaks, so we didn't really do too much to it. Okay, so let's just see how this looks, and then in the next part we'll go ahead and do the final sort of tweaks, and I'll go through render settings and so on and see how we can create a final render. So as you can see, we did quite a few, only a few tweaks and apply simple shaders, we get a very nice decent render out of Keyshot already. Okay, so thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next part for the final tweaks.